The morning sun painted the Niger's waters gold, but Sarah couldn't shake the chill that ran down her spine. 3 brides-to-be had vanished in as many months, all from the same riverside town of Riverdale. Each had disappeared the night before their wedding, leaving behind only their white dresses and the haunting echo of traditional songs drifting from the sacred river. Detective Michael Thompson adjusted his tie as he stepped out of his car, dust swirling around his polished shoes. The locals had been reluctant to call in outside help, but when the 4th bride went missing, the town council had no choice. Michael had solved mysteries in Lagos and Abuja, but nothing had prepared him for the strange atmosphere that seemed to hang over this quiet settlement like morning mist. "You must be the detective from the city," called out Elder Grace, her weathered hands gripping a walking stick carved with intricate symbols. Her eyes held secrets that seemed older than the river itself. "I'm afraid you've come to a place where the living and the dead don't always stay in their proper places." Michael extended his hand respectfully. "Elder Grace, I presume. I'm here to find answers. For young women can't just disappear into thin air." The old woman's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Can't they? You city folk always think you understand everything. But tell me, detective, what do you know about promises made to rivers?" Before Michael could respond, a young woman emerged from behind a mud brick house, tears streaming down her face. This was Rebecca, the latest bride-to-be whose wedding had been postponed indefinitely after her friends' disappearances. "They took Emma last night," Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. "Just like the others. We heard the singing again. That awful, beautiful singing that comes from the water when the moon is full. My grandmother used to say it was the river calling for what it's owed." Michael pulled out his notebook, trying to maintain his professional demeanor despite the unease creeping into his chest. "What exactly did you hear? And who is they?" Rebecca's hands trembled as she pointed toward the riverbank. "The voices of women. Dead women. They sing the old wedding songs, but wrong. Like they're calling someone to join them. Emma's dress was found this morning by the sacred shrine, perfectly folded, as if she'd simply walked into the water." Elder Grace nodded grimly. "Each bride was set to marry men from families who've lived here for generations. Families with old debts. The river remembers everything, detective. And it always collects what it's owed." Michael felt his rational mind struggling against something he couldn't quite name. As an investigator, he'd learned to trust facts over folklore. But the fear in these people's eyes was real. The missing women were real. And somewhere in this tangle of tradition and terror lay the truth he'd been sent to find. "I'll need to examine the shrine and interview the families," he said firmly. "Whatever's happening here, there's a logical explanation." Elder Grace's knowing smile made him wonder if he was about to discover that some mysteries ran deeper than logic could reach. The sacred shrine stood like a silent guardian where the river curved deepest, its ancient stones worn smooth by countless hands and endless years. Michael approached carefully, his city shoes slipping slightly on the muddy bank. The air here felt different, thicker, charged with something he couldn't name. "The shrine's been here since before my great-grandmother's time," Elder Grace explained, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 generations of brides have made their final prayers here. But lately," she trailed off, pointing to strange markings carved into the wet earth around the base. Michael knelt down, examining the symbols. They weren't random scratches. These were deliberate, forming a pattern that seemed to spiral toward the water. "When did these appear?" After the first bride vanished, Rebecca said, wrapping her arms around herself despite the morning heat. Sarah's mother found them the next day, fresh as if someone had made them in the night. As Michael photographed the markings, his phone battery died unexpectedly. He frowned, checking his spare equipment. Everything electronic seemed to malfunction near the shrine. "That's unusual," Elder Grace chuckled darkly. "The old spirits don't appreciate modern interruptions, Detective. Perhaps you should rely on older ways of seeing." Behind the shrine, Michael discovered something that made his blood run cold. Hidden beneath overgrown vines were 4 small alcoves carved into the rock, each containing personal items: a gold bracelet, a silk headwrap, a pair of beaded earrings, and a wooden comb. The items were perfectly preserved despite being exposed to the elements. "These belonged to the missing brides," Rebecca gasped, recognizing her friend's possessions immediately. Michael reached for the bracelet, but Elder Grace grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't touch what belongs to the river now," she warned, "unless you're prepared to pay the price yourself." "What price?" Michael demanded, his patience wearing thin. "What aren't you telling me about these disappearances?" Elder Grace's eyes grew distant, as if looking into the past. 50 years ago there was a wedding here. A young man named David from one of the founding families was to marry a river priestess named Amara. But David's family was greedy. They broke the sacred marriage pact that had protected our town for generations. She pointed to the deepest part of the river. Amara walked into those waters on her wedding night, cursing David's bloodline and demanding that the river be given what was promised: 4 brides from the families who betrayed the old ways. Michael felt skeptical, but couldn't ignore the pattern. "You're saying these missing women are descendants of David's family and his conspirators?" Rebecca nodded tearfully. "Sarah, Emma, Grace, and Mary. We're all related to the original families. And tomorrow." She swallowed hard. "Tomorrow was supposed to be my wedding day." As if summoned by her words, a low humming began to rise from the water. The sound was hauntingly beautiful. Women's voices singing in harmony, growing stronger as the river mist began to swirl around the shrine. Michael grabbed Rebecca's arm as she took a step toward the water, her eyes glazing over. "Rebecca, stay with me." The singing stopped abruptly, leaving only the gentle lapping of water against stone. But Michael had seen something in the mist that made his hands shake. The silhouettes of 4 women in white, standing just beneath the water's surface, their arms reaching upward. "They're calling her," Elder Grace whispered. "And tomorrow night, when the moon is full again, Rebecca will have to choose: honor the old debt or watch our entire town pay the price." Michael spent the night poring over old town records by candlelight. His modern devices still refused to work properly. The municipal building's dusty archives told a story of prosperity built on betrayal. In 1974, 4 prominent families had signed a development contract, agreeing to modernize the riverfront. What they hadn't mentioned was breaking a centuries-old sacred marriage pact to do it. "My grandfather was one of them," admitted James Patterson, Rebecca's fiancé, when Michael confronted him at dawn. James's hands shook as he held his morning coffee. The Patterson, Williams, Johnson, and Davis families. We all knew the stories, but nobody believed. Nobody thought the old ways still mattered. Michael studied the young man's face. "But you believe now. How can I not?" James's voice cracked. "I've lost Sarah, my cousin. Emma was my sister's best friend. And now Rebecca. He buried his face in his hands. Maybe I should call off the wedding. Maybe if there's no ceremony, the curse won't complete itself. It's too late for that, came Elder Grace's voice from the doorway. She entered carrying a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. The river doesn't care about your ceremonies anymore. Cares about the debt. For brides were promised 50 years ago. For brides it will have. Michael examined the journal. It contained detailed records of the original pact, written in both English and local dialect. According to the text, the river priestess Amara had been promised as a bride to ensure the town's prosperity and protection. In exchange, the river would provide fish, fertile soil, and safe passage for trade. But your families got greedy, Elder Grace continued, addressing James directly. They wanted to build docks, charge fees for river access, and sell sacred land to outsiders. So they convinced David to abandon Amara on their wedding night. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. I've been having dreams, she whispered. I see her, Amara. She's not angry anymore. She's lonely. She just wants her wedding to finally happen. Michael felt pieces clicking together in his mind. What if the solution isn't preventing the fourth wedding? What if it's completing the original one? Both James and Elder Grace stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Think about it, Michael pressed on. Amara never got her wedding. The families never honored their commitment. What if instead of taking 4 innocent lives, we give the river what it was actually promised? You mean? James's eyes widened with understanding and horror. I mean we find David Patterson. He'd be in his 70s now, and finish what should have been finished 50 years ago. Elder Grace's weathered face broke into the first genuine smile Michael had seen since arriving. The detective thinks like our ancestors. Yes, David still lives. He moved to the city after Amara's death, but he never married. Never could, some say. Rebecca grabbed Michael's arm. But would that save the others? Sarah, Emma, Grace, and Mary. Michael looked toward the river, where morning mist was already beginning to rise despite the early hour. I don't know, but I think we're about to find out. Because ready or not, tonight the moon will be full, and one way or another, this 50-year-old debt is going to be paid. As if in response to his words, the haunting melody began again. But this time it sounded less like mourning and more like hope. The drive to Lagos felt like a journey through time itself. David Patterson's apartment building stood in sharp contrast to the riverside village. Concrete and steel reaching toward a sky that seemed somehow less alive than the one back home. Michael climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last, knowing he was about to ask a man to face his greatest failure. David answered the door on the third knock. 73 years old. He still carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime running from something. His eyes, the same deep brown as his descendant James, widened when Michael introduced himself. Riverdale, David whispered, his voice like autumn leaves. I wondered when someone would come. I've been having the dreams again. Her voice, calling my name across the water. Inside the sparse apartment, David's walls were covered with paintings. All of the same woman. Beautiful, ethereal, with eyes that seemed to look directly into the viewer's soul. Amara, frozen in time by guilt and memory. I've painted her for 50 years, David confessed, pouring tea with trembling hands. Every night, I see her walking into that river. Every morning, I wake up knowing it's my fault she's gone. Michael leaned forward. Then you know why I'm here. David's laugh was bitter. To arrest me. To finally make me pay for my cowardice. Detective, I've been paying every day since 1974. I haven't been able to love another woman. Haven't been able to touch the river water. Haven't been able to come home. 4 young women have disappeared, Michael said quietly. Your great nieces. Your family's daughters. The river is collecting on a debt you never settled. The old man's composure cracked. Sarah. Emma. Little Mary with the bright smile. Tears rolled down weathered cheeks. I hoped if I stayed away, if I never returned, the old spirits would forget. Spirits don't forget, Mr. Patterson. But they can forgive. There's still time to make this right. David stood and walked to the window overlooking the bustling city. You don't understand what you're asking. Amara wasn't just a village girl. She was chosen by the river itself. To marry her was to become bound to forces older than human memory. My family convinced me it was just superstition, but I felt it that night. The power in her touch, the wisdom in her eyes. So you abandoned her. I ran like a coward, David admitted. And she walked into those waters rather than face the shame of being rejected. The whole village watched their protector die because I couldn't find the courage to honor my word. Michael's phone buzzed with a message from Elder Grace. The moon rises in 3 hours. The singing has started again. Rebecca is fighting the call, but she's weakening. If you're coming, come now. David saw the message and closed his eyes. She's calling them now, isn't she? All 4 girls. They're probably standing at the water's edge, hearing wedding songs that should have been ours 50 years ago. Then let's give her what she's been waiting for, Michael said firmly. Come home, David. Complete your wedding. Honor your promise. The old man was quiet for a long moment, studying his paintings of Amara. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a strength that hadn't been there before. I've dreamed of this day for half a century. Dreamed of walking back to that river and saying the words I should have said so long ago. But, Detective. He turned to face Michael with eyes full of ancient sadness. You do understand that some promises, once made to the river, can only be kept one way. Michael felt a chill run down his spine as David began gathering items from around the apartment. A white shirt, his father's wedding ring, and an old photograph of Amara smiling by the riverside. Let's go home, David said. It's time to finish what I started. The full moon cast silver pathways across the Niger's surface as David Patterson stood at the sacred shrine for the first time in 50 years. The entire village had gathered at a respectful distance, their faces illuminated by flickering torches. Rebecca stood with James and the other descendants, no longer fighting the river's call but waiting with quiet dignity. She's here, David whispered, his eyes fixed on the water. I can feel her presence. The air shimmered, and slowly, figures began to emerge from the river mist. First came Amara, exactly as she appeared in David's paintings but translucent, eternal. Her wedding dress flowed like liquid moonlight, and her eyes held not anger but infinite patience. Behind her walked 4 younger women in white. Sarah, Emma, Grace, and Mary. Their faces peaceful but expectant. My beloved! Amara's voice carried across the water like a gentle breeze. You've finally come home to me. David stepped forward, his aged hands trembling as he reached toward her. I'm sorry, Amara. I'm so sorry for what I did to you, to our people, to our sacred bond. I was a coward, and my cowardice has cost too much. Michael watched in wonder as the supernatural and natural worlds merged. The missing brides weren't trapped or tormented. They were witnesses, waiting for justice to be served and promises to be kept. Elder Grace stepped forward, holding the ancient wedding ceremonial items. The river accepts your return, David Patterson. But the debt must be paid in full. Are you prepared to honor the original pact? David nodded, understanding flooding his weathered features. I am. I've been preparing for 50 years. What happened next would be talked about in Riverdale for generations. David waded into the river until he stood waist-deep in the sacred waters. Amara moved toward him, her spirit form becoming more solid with each step. When their hands touched, the water around them began to glow with soft, ethereal light. I, David Patterson, take you, Amara, as my bride before the river spirits and our ancestors. David spoke the ancient vows, his voice carrying across the water. I bind myself to you and to the sacred waters that gave you life. And I accept you, my beloved, after all these years of waiting, Amara replied, her spirit form growing brighter. But know that this union requires the ultimate sacrifice. Are you willing to join me in the realm where the river spirits dwell? Michael started forward, but Elder Grace gently held him back. This is his choice, detective. His debt to pay. David smiled with more peace than he'd felt in half a century. I've been dead inside since the night I left you. Let me finally live by your side. As their spirits merged in the glowing water, something miraculous occurred. The 4 missing brides began to solidify, their ghostly forms becoming flesh once more. They walked from the river, alive and whole, into the embracing arms of their families. Sarah gasped as she touched solid ground. We were waiting for the wedding to be complete so we could come home. The river's glow faded, leaving only gentle ripples where David and Amara had stood together. But those who looked closely could see 2 figures dancing just beneath the surface, finally united in eternal love. Michael approached Rebecca, who was crying tears of joy and relief. It's over, he said softly. The debt is paid. The promise is kept. Elder Grace nodded, her ancient eyes bright with satisfaction. The river has its wedding at last. And our town has its protection restored. David Patterson found his courage 50 years too late. But not too late for love to triumph. As the villagers began their celebration of the returned brides and the completed sacred marriage, Michael realized he'd learned something profound about justice, sacrifice, and the power of keeping one's word, even when the cost is everything. The river sang softly in the moonlight, no longer a song of longing, but a lullaby of love finally fulfilled. Share your thoughts about this powerful tale of ancestral debts and eternal love. Like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing African mysteries.